Did you get the invitation to be able to say? Wonderful. When I was thinking about this gathering, which came as a request that was very, very easy for us to respond to affirmatively from our ministry formation folks saying, help us with moderating meetings. We had talked a little bit about such in that forum, but we also realized that there are plenty of people in ministry in their first calls, in not their first calls, who really haven't had the chance to devote some time to talking about and thinking about what it means to be an effective moderator of session meetings, of congregational meetings, of committee meetings. And moderating has a lot of principles that are really applicable to all our work throughout our presbytery. Whether you're moderating a session or a congregational meeting, you might be asked to moderate a committee meeting or a gathering in your setting. And so we thought this would have wide appeal. So then from that point, I went to my enormous brain and said, who would do this well and effectively? And there were lots of names. We have some really great folks in our midst. But our immediate past moderator came to mind as someone who is posing as an honorably retired person, although that's kind of a fake out because he's as active as he's ever been in the life of the presbytery and beyond. And the affirmation of my inward sense of the rightness of asking Steve Quinlan to share was met with an outward confirmation when he said, "Oh, it sounds like fun." And I thought, well, this is the right person for the right time. We're recording because we've got folks who are going to want to access this conversation and presentation. I want to go on record as thanking you, Steve, for your willingness to do this and for the fact that you uttered the words, "This sounds like fun." Our format is always that the presentation that we have, the time we have together begins and ends with prayer, because we're Presbyterian after all. And then the floor is our presenters for the next 45 to 50 minutes, and to handle however you wish, Steve. We leave some time for questions at the end if you haven't woven that into your presentation. And then we always do this because we know that people are wired in all kinds of different ways. And if you're willing, Steve, to stay on the call for a few minutes after the recording ends for the post lunch and learn kind of smaller group one-on-one, if somebody has a question that they would feel more comfortable asking in a smaller group, we do that. And we also sort of call that the post narthex conversation as well. Conversation in the narthex. Are you good with all that, Steve?
Sure, sounds great.
Awesome, thanks so much. Let's begin then by welcoming everybody and saying Happy New Year to folks I haven't seen on Zoom so far this year. It's delightful to see you all and to have you with us. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. Let's start with prayer. God, we do give you thanks for fresh starts and new beginnings, even in the midst of things that continue to be a part of our lives, shaping us, tugging at our heels, weighing us down. We are so grateful that despite all that would weigh us on us so heavily, that you provide us with an opportunity to meet together and to think in creative ways to enhance our knowledge, to grow in our faith. We thank you for each one gathered, and most especially for our presenter today. Be with us as we seek always to do your work and will. For we pray this in Christ's strong name. Amen.
Amen.
Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for that lovely prayer, and thanks for the invitation to do this. And thank you to each one who has joined with us today for some conversation around moderating meetings. First of all, a disclaimer. I'm no great expert on this, although I do have a little bit of experience over the years, and I've developed a style of moderating that works for me, and I'll try to share that with you today. This is going to be a conversation, I hope, and I've broken it down into 4 parts, and we can have questions throughout. So if we're talking about something and a question occurs to you, speak up and interrupt, and we'll try to respond to that. And if it's something that we can't respond to right now, we'll research it and respond to it later. So I'm going to use the kind of conventional journalistic questions to frame this conversation. So I've got 4 questions for us to think about concerning moderating. And that is who, why, what, and how. Not exactly the journalistic questions, but I think that they'll work for us. So the first question that I like to think about and ask myself as I'm heading to a meeting or planning ahead for a meeting is who? That is to say, who's there, and what kind of a group is this, and what sort of dynamics might I expect? But all of this has to do, in my mind, with respect for your team. And I think that's coming right after our sense of responsibility and gratitude to God for being there and for guiding us. I think having respect for the team, the committee, the group, the commission, or whomever is gathering for the meeting that you've been asked to moderate or that I've been asked to moderate is of paramount importance. All of these people typically are volunteers, and while others are paid staff in various contexts, everybody has made a commitment from their heart to be a part of your team. And it's a great honor and a great responsibility to be sure that we respect their degree of commitment and express our gratitude, not only in words, but in the way that we interact with our team. That it's important to know that these people are coming together with you, offer their gifts, and to share what God has given them and what their life journey has taught them. All of those things will be woven together into the conversation that constitutes the meeting that you have. So that's where I like to begin, is with considering who is there and taking into account the commitment that each one has made, and that translates into respecting their wisdom. You know, the wisdom of God does not begin or end with any individual, and as a group, it's always been my experience that the wisdom of the group is far greater than the sum of its parts. That there is such understanding and insight that resides within all of our colleagues and friends. And part of our task as a moderator is to find ways to elicit conversation and give people an opportunity to share their wisdom and their insight. And that's all about respecting them as a team and as individuals. One of the other things, and there's a lot more that I could say in each one of these 4 questions, and I hope that you will say some things as we move along. One of the things that I find that it's really important to do is to respect people's time. You know, we all are busy, whatever our situation in life is. We've got stuff that makes demands on our times left and right, things that we want to give our time to. We've got not only our work and our commitments to serve in a congregation or in the presbytery or elsewhere. We've got our family, we've got that we want to spend time with. We've got our own private time that we need to hold close and be careful about. We've got our hobbies, you know what I'm saying. Time is a precious, precious commodity. And there's nothing, if I'm attending a meeting and participating, and I get a sense that time is not being respected. People are going on and on, or on tangents, or wasting time, taking more time than needs to be taken, and then I start to get anxious and frustrated. And that maybe that's a weakness in me, but in leading others, I want to be responsible and respect their time. And then lastly, in the few comments that I'm making in this regard, people have a right to be heard. And I think that that's really important in a meeting, to respect the right for each one to be fully heard. And sometimes that is just a simple matter of, if people are being particularly quiet. Let's say you've got a team of half a dozen or so people, and several are engaging, but there's some who are sitting back and just kind of taking things in, which is fine. Everybody has the right to do that. But sometimes it's good just to notice that and to ask, Sally, you haven't said anything today. What are your thoughts on this? Or that kind of interrogatory to get to encourage people to express themselves and to be heard. One of the things also that I have zero tolerance for, and if you've been in meetings that I've moderated, you've probably experienced this, is that crosstalk or sidebar conversations is so disrespectful, and not only for the other people in the meeting, but for the meeting itself. We want to hear what you have to say. And if you're saying it to your neighbor that's sitting next to you in the meeting, or in Zoom meetings, it's less of a problem because we can put people on mute, and it's not easy to have sidebar conversations or crosstalk. But the chat feature on Zoom kind of takes that place sometimes. And so, because people have a right to be heard, I can't listen to 2 conversations at once. And I want to hear what you have to say to your neighbor. If it's important enough to say it to one of us, then I think it's important enough to say it to all of us in a meeting. So this is all kind of common sense stuff, but it's about where we start with meetings, and that is to respect the team. Does anybody on our team here today have a question or a comment or something that you'd like to add to this first piece? Take yourself off mute and speak up. Not hearing anything and not hearing anybody? Okay, then if you have a question, jot it down. We'll come back to it later. We can circle around, but I'm gonna move along because I want to respect your time. The second question that I think about in moderating sometimes is why. There's a reason that you're having a meeting, and I think that it's important to be clear as a moderator in why you are meeting. So you have to respect the reason. Thank you, Vicki. And respecting the reason, first and foremost, means if there's not a reason to have a meeting, don't have it. You know, if you're the moderator and you don't have anything on the agenda that needs to be dealt with, or if it can be dealt with in an email between 2 or 3 of your members, don't have meetings just to have meetings or just because they're on the schedule. That's my view, is have a reason for your meeting. And if you can accomplish what your purpose is without having to schedule something and have everybody meet together, if it can be done reasonably, do it. But don't meet without a reason to meet. And that it's fine if you have a light agenda. Maybe there's ways to do it without bringing everybody together. Anyway, that's one thing in respecting the reason. But when you do have a meeting, be clear on what your purpose is for the meeting. And that is these are questions that we might ask. Is our purpose in this meeting just to consider something, to think about it together, to collect wisdom, to gather information, to kick things around, or to have, like this meeting, the purpose of this meeting is to think together and share some insight perhaps on how to moderate a meeting. Well, every meeting, I think, has a purpose, and is that purpose to think together, to consider, to listen to a presentation? Sometimes it is, and that's fine. But sometimes we have meetings because there are actions that need to be taken. And so if the purpose of the meeting is to act, then the conversation should be directed toward taking an appropriate action. And that's part of why we have process and the importance of moving the meeting along towards its goal, towards achieving its purpose. You know, meetings should not be dull. You can have some fun in a meeting, but we need to think about it. Are we there to tell personal anecdotes or you know, to get people to chuckle? Sometimes that's important as a part of the meeting, but is that really why we're gathering together? So let's respect the reason for meeting and be clear on our purposes. Do you have any responses or thoughts or questions about that? Okay. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm saying here is just common sense, and most of you have been involved in meetings or have moderated to the point where you probably already know these things.
Yeah, I have a question. Can
Please.
I ask a question about the reason? You know, sometimes we have scheduled meetings, maybe that run every month or every other month. What if there's no particular thing to discuss? Do we cancel the meeting or just meet and pray and go? Yeah, I need to know how to handle it.
Yeah, so I'd be interested to hear what other people's experience is in this regard, but I'll tell you that I have never canceled a meeting because there was not enough to do, and had people say, oh, I really want to meet anyway. I mean, almost universally, the response is thank you for not scheduling or for canceling a scheduled meeting because we don't have enough to do. So yeah, that would be what I would do. I would say I'd contact the people that were invited to a scheduled meeting, and if there's nothing to consider, tell them. We don't have sufficient material or matters to discuss or to consider or to act on at this scheduled meeting. So I'm canceling the meeting. Enjoy your evening off or your afternoon and use your time otherwise today. That's typically how I would handle it. What do others of you think? No counterpoint?
Steve,
Okay, yeah.
I think the only thing I might add when saying I'm not aware of any other business, I might say something like, and this is the last call, is there anything? Because there might, it's a dangerous precedent to set, right? Because it says you can say at the last minute that you had something to bring, but I think it also, if you're introducing that, if you're not used to, and if the body is not used to having a meeting canceled for lack of business, I think I might invite people to concur with me that they in fact do not have any other business to bring. That's the only modification I might suggest, but I wouldn't do that, you know, after a bunch of time, because it sends the message that you can, you know, not communicate ahead of time, and that's not cool either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really wise, Jennifer. Thank you. It's important to give the people who are bringing business to a meeting or bringing matters before the group, give them the opportunity to say, oh, well, I really do want to meet to discuss X, Y, or Z. And typically, yeah.
I think you're right on. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in not having a meeting if you don't have to. But I think the only other caveat I would put on that is considering the culture of whatever group is meeting. And sometimes those meetings where you don't have a lot weighing on the agenda are the meetings where really creative and meaningful discussion happens. So I see both sides to that coin. I have certainly canceled meetings for lack of business to address before, but I also know that sometimes those meetings with little or nothing on the agenda provide an opportunity for conversation if the culture of that meeting space is such that that's acceptable behavior. You know, if it's a more corporate style meeting, then probably not. But so that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, I think that's great, Kevin. Thank you. That's part of respecting the who of the group. You know, you gotta know who your group is. Thanks for that. Anybody else? Those are important comments. Thank you. Okay, then I'm going to move ahead to the next question and these are not, you know, necessarily questions that we would always ask in series like this. It's just the way when I was thinking about this group today and how to make a presentation on moderating, that seemed reasonable to me. One of the other questions that I think it's important to ask is, and this intersects with what we've just been saying, is what are you meeting about? And I think it's important to have a plan for your meeting and then respect the plan, which means to have an agenda for each meeting. I think that now there are times when the agenda may be, as Kevin helpfully points out, to simply get together and do some group building or to share with one another. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a formal agenda. But most of our meetings are going to have matters that come before the group, come to the group for discussion and possibly action. And so I think it's incumbent on the moderator to have conversation with folks prior to the meeting and establish some kind of an agenda. And, you know, I've moderated a lot of sessions in a lot of different settings, for instance, and most sessions agendas can be broad enough to allow lots of conversation, but I think it's important to have something, a plan in mind for what you're going to do during that meeting, and how you're going to structure the meeting to allow for adequate conversation, but also to get things done that need to be done, and also keep the meeting moving along and towards an intended end. So an agenda, a docket, those I think that's something that the moderator needs to be aware of and plan on. And there's lots of people that will help with that. Who prepares the docket or who prepares the agenda for the meeting that you're having? It may not be the moderator, but you should be aware of it in any case ahead of the meeting. Anybody have some comments on agenda? One of the things that I found helpful, and I think it also helps to move a meeting along, is to use a consent agenda if it's possible, if it's feasible. And I think you probably know what a consent agenda is, and that's a list of items that are not controversial, that are typically routine in nature, that don't, you would not anticipate that there would be any enlightening or helpful debate on the question. And so the action is proposed to be given consent without debate. And sometimes there's a short list of items like that would come to a meeting. Sometimes approving the minutes of a previous meeting. On Commission on Ministry, there's often reports that are given by minister members or congregations that really don't require anything but acceptance, and there's not going to be any helpful debate on that report. And you just list these things in a consent agenda, a list of items that are non-controversial, and you vote on the receiving or approving the consent agenda all together in mass, not as individual items. Always giving people an opportunity to pull items out of the consent agenda if they see something in there that they really want to, they have a question about or want to comment on. Those things can be pulled out of a consent agenda and considered individually. But if it's possible and works well for you, then I recommend using a consent agenda if it's possible. Helps move things along and gets routine business taken care of, leaving time for things that are of perhaps require more conversation and deliberation or debate. That seems fairly non-controversial to use a consent agenda. So without objection, we'll move on to the next item. I find that it's sometimes helpful, even if you have an agenda and you've given as much thought or worked with others beforehand to see to it that your meeting is planned well. There can be items that will come up that require more conversation than you have time for in the meeting that's at hand, or aspects of matters that you didn't consider before and that come up during the meeting that need further consideration or research. And so I find that it's good to not be afraid to defer matters if it's necessary. You know, if the debate on a matter is going to eat up so much time in a meeting, and if you're debating without adequate information to reach a conclusion or to move the debate ahead, it's okay to defer those conversations and those decisions to a later time. And you know, there's rules in Robert's Rules of Order has ways of doing this, but I think first of all there has to be an openness to that possibility. So no plan is infallible. There are things that happen that are unexpected, and sometimes you can deal with them at the time, but sometimes it's necessary to defer. Jennifer's just put up a message about a resource for.
Yeah, it's premature. Please excuse me.
Okay, that's okay.
I hit send too soon and haven't finished yet.
Oh,
I'll hold
okay.
Please
Okay.
excuse me.
No problem.
Mr. Moderator.
I'm glad to see that. So this is certainly not all that might be said about planning a meeting, but I'm just trying to lift up the importance of planning, and the tool that we have, the best tool that we have for planning is an agenda. And but even that is not infallible. Also, one thing I didn't note here that I've typically tried to do is, rather than just list items on the agenda, I try to assign them a time frame, even if it's, I mean, our stated clerk does this for our presbytery meetings, and it's extraordinarily helpful to have time allocated and for people to in advance ask for not just a spot on the agenda, but a certain amount of time that they feel is necessary for their report or for their discussion. And I think that's really helpful. And to try to allocate, often it's just your best guess, and sometimes it's not really good to hold people to it, but it still is helpful, I think, to keep the process moving. And also, something I was going to say just slipped my mind. There's there's nothing wrong with having an order of the day built into your agenda. And what that means is that a certain time of day, the assembly is going to break for breakout sessions, or when we've met in person, there would be a time to break for lunch, or you know, a meal, or just a brief rest. And I have found it helpful in session meetings in particular, where you're often meeting in an evening, to have an order of the day that this meeting is going to end at 9 p.m. And when you reach that hour, the meeting is ended. So people are aware of that. I would just say, using 9 p.m. as an example, because believe it or not, over the years, I've encountered a number of elders who have resigned from session because a meeting would be convened at 7 o'clock and it would still be going at 11:15 at night, you know, and that's disrespectful. And it can be, you can deal with that by having an order of the day, a time at which your meeting is scheduled to end. And I find, just as a matter of also respecting time, that after an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the outside limit, people's attention is cooked, and they're no longer contributing meaningfully to the meeting. Attention starts to wander, people get tired, and the meeting qualitatively is diminished to the point where you might as well end it and come back another time, or defer things to later. So comments or questions about agenda?
Steve?
Yeah.
Richard Fair.
Hi, Richard.
I would say too, in the world we live in now, since March of 2020, I would even argue an hour meeting is probably more appropriate on Zoom versus maybe 2 hours that was appropriate in person. My professor wife conducts a lot of things over Zoom, and I think she's even looked at effectiveness after 1 hour on Zoom and seen it decrease. So we may even want to consider that if we're meeting by Zoom for much longer, which we may be. We may even modify that 2-hour thought you had to maybe just an hour, try to break things up at least so we're not going too long. It seems like these Zoom meetings, for some reason, to have them longer than an hour, it just doesn't work like in-person meetings did. And so I just wanted to offer that thought.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really.
I think there's research to suggest that the focus that it takes to be on Zoom and the lack of body language that you have when you're in a meeting with people in person is such that the data is showing that an hour on Zoom is the neurological equivalent of 2 hours in real life. So that just killed Zoom meetings for me when I learned that. All of a sudden I had validation for what Richard says, that there's a lack of effectiveness, and we should all do Zoom meetings much more concisely, even though it saves us time and travel and all of that, and we can wear our slippers.
Yeah, so true. You know, Zoom meetings have some advantages, and I think we're kind of aware of that because, for instance, on a Zoom meeting, crosstalk is really not as big of an issue as in-person meetings. But clearly there are downsides, and it's good to keep those things in mind. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. One of the things that I miss in a Zoom meeting is just the energy of the group. You just can't get that collective sense of what the energy of the group is. Like right now, I'm looking at my screen and I see the screen that Vicki is sharing as I asked her to. It says respect the plan, and I see 4 faces, one of which is mine. Now I can change that setting, I guess, on Zoom, but it's different than being in your presence. So, thanks for those comments. Anything else about respecting the plan?
I have a question about Zoom meetings. What if you have Zoom meetings and then you are trying to concise the time? And what if you have background noise? Maybe a spouse and the other spouse welcoming visitors and it's disrupting. How do you handle it? Do you say, can we have quietness, or just be quiet and just keep going? So how do you do it so that you are respectful of the people and then you're still effective in the meeting?
Yeah, good question. Anybody want to comment on that? So I can click mute and then turn to the person who's disrupting the meeting and say, would you please be quiet? I'm trying to have a meeting. I probably would not say it quite that harshly, but I might. And the mute button is really helpful. If you're not the one who's has the floor, so to speak. But then again, I don't mind a dog barking in the background. Makes it feel a little more like home.
Steve, this is Michelle Bartel.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi. One of the things that struck me as you've been describing these different questions is how they're all kind of practices of hospitality. I'd never thought about a meeting like that before, or moderating it in terms of being a host, even though we call them hosts on Zoom. The respecting of the people and the plan and so forth, respecting the purpose. It all sounds like it's evoking that sense of hospitality. So it strikes me that this question about the disruptions that are on the other end is that probably a good way. This is me thinking out loud and spitballing. That the next time what I might do is have the group together, set some ground rules for how Zoom meetings will work. And what you agree is acceptable if there are disruptions on the other end, or if you have disruptions in your own setting, so that then you can hold each other accountable to that. And if you have to shut somebody off, then it's done because they're not attending to the boundaries in that regard, if that makes sense. Like if you're having a lot of disruptions and the agreement is that you mute yourself, but you're not muting yourself, then having the host mute the person. Again, I'm just spitballing, and there could be a whole bunch of different ground rules, but they wouldn't be rules so much as this is how our covenant with each other is going to work.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense, and a great insight into the way we think about our meetings as occasions for hospitality, having guests in your space and being a guest in other people's space. That's one of the things I do like about Zoom, is I get to see what's over your shoulders and some of the spaces that folks inhabit. And that always is, to me, it gives kind of homey feeling sometimes. But there we could have a whole hour of conversation, I think, easily about Zoom meetings and what we can do or not do. But I'm going to move this particular Zoom meeting along to my last question, which is kind of a process question of how, and the importance of respecting the process. In many ways, this is where a meeting succeeds or fails in some sense, is that the process of how you move the meeting along and how you deal with the eventualities that arise in discussion or debate, and questions about polity and so forth. But first of all, as far as process is concerned, I think it's important to keep a meeting moving. That you can easily get bogged down on one particular part of a meeting, and that does a disservice to the other parts, other reports, and that sort of thing. So the moderator really has the responsibility to keep the meeting moving. Other people will sometimes, if you don't, other people will remind you and urge you along, and that's fine. But as the moderator, keep that in mind, that it's your responsibility to keep the meeting moving ahead. Secondly is, and I've listed this with a caveat, use the Robert's Rules of Order, but man, sometimes that just gets so cumbersome to be stuck in a circular process with Robert's rules, and you're trying to keep track whether the amendment is coming first, and is there an amendment to the amendment, and and Robert's rules are really helpful. But I find that they're much more helpful in certain settings than in others. A meeting of a small session with 4 or 5 people, Robert's Rules gets in the way to a certain extent. I'm just offering my opinion. Disagree with me, please. But in a congregational meeting where you've got matters of congregation-wide import that are going to be consequential for individuals, let's say it's a decision about pastoral relationship or something like that, it's necessary then to really go by the book as far as Robert's Rules are concerned, because those rules are set up, I think, largely for meetings of some scale and some gravity. And so use your Robert's Rules of Order, but don't be a slave to it, especially in certain contexts. One of the things, for instance, that I find in a more informal meetings, a committee meeting or something like that, is that you can accomplish things within Robert's Rules of Order without saying, is there a motion? Is there a second? Then have debate, all in favor. You don't have to do that. Robert's Rules doesn't even tell you that you have to do that. If you can do things without objection. And if everybody's in agreement, we'll consider that done and move on. Those are, they eat up time, and it's not necessary, especially in a small informal group where you've got consensus. One of the things, though, that is important, and I didn't put it in my list of things here, and I jotted it down as a handwritten note, was to be sure that somebody is taking notes in a meeting. Who's the recording secretary? Who's the clerk? And make sure that there's somebody keeping notes, a record of what's happening at the meeting. Now, we can do that on Zoom easily by recording the meeting. We can go back and listen to it again, but still, somebody's got to do that. And I think it's important. And I didn't note that in terms of process. The next thing is respect the Book of Order. But and there's a caveat there. The Book of Order, especially in the new form of government, has given us much more latitude and possibility for interpretation than we had for years and years. As Presbyterians, we respect the Book of Order. I think it's essential that we work within the framework of the Book of Order. And as a moderator, if you're whatever group you're moderating, if it's a council or a committee of one of the councils of the church, you should read the Book of Order with respect to that council and what its responsibilities are and what the guidance is that's offered in the Book of Order. But much of the stuff that's in the Book of Order is couched in language that allows for interpretation. You should stay within the framework of the Book of Order, but understand the spirit of the Book of Order. It's not intended to be this onerous rule book that weighs us down, but it's meant to be a way to be a connectional group that respects one another and respects the place that we have in the larger church. So try to have a sense of what the form of government is, especially with respect to what you're doing. But remember that the Book of Order is not meant to be a burden, but a tool to move us ahead. So keep with the spirit of the Book of Order. And one of my favorite phrases is to practice constitutional creativity. And that means that there are often possibilities in the Book of Order to get things done that a real rigid and strict interpretation would constrain. And I think, especially if we're dealing with situations where the exigencies of a congregation, a smaller membership congregation, for example, simply don't permit certain things to be observed strictly. But if we can stay with the spirit of what it is that the Book of Order is guiding us to do, but I'm not saying play fast and loose with our polity, but I'm talking about getting things done for the sake of the common good, for the congregation that you're dealing with, or for the presbytery for that matter. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. And the last comment that I would make under process is just be human. This is not a computerized process. We are all fallible. As a moderator, you're not the end all, know all of the meetings. To be willing to be wrong and own that, and that's okay. Just be human and be understanding of the humanity of others. Oh, I'm looking at the clock now, and we've done 45 minutes. So let's. Are there any questions about process? I was afraid this would be the one where all the questions come up. But go ahead.
Sorry, I think I have. And
Good.
I'm sorry. that,
That's
yeah,
okay.
we have veterans in the church. Veterans, I mean church veterans. There are people that have been there forever. They are so used to the process. And for them, the process has to be followed. And any deviation, may affect them. And so in doing that, I think we have to gradually see a way of, but if you get loose immediately, not loose in that sense, but if you want to make it simpler than what they are used to, then you may get into some issues. So I think what I try to do in my own case is to just gradually, for example, if you want to see if a quorum is formed, that's a way that they want it. It could be, oh yeah, it's the secretary, it's the session clerk that should, declare a quorum, not the moderator, whatever. Maybe they're used to that kind of stuff. Then you gently keep following and gently introducing new stuff. So that's my comment, because your first thing says respect the team. Who are you dealing with? Even though we're talking about the process, the who comes into the process.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful. And I suppose many of us have encountered that. One of the things that I like to do when I'm first meeting with the group, I've been asked to come and moderate a session or something like that, is before we even begin the meeting, kind of lay out my method, my approach, how I intend to do this, and just get it out right up front, that here's what my goals are, here's how I interpret Robert's Rules of Order, and here's how I hope that we'll proceed. Other comments. Now, this is time for in general, I guess, not just process, but any comments that things that I've overlooked that you can help us with, or questions that are remaining unaddressed. Karen, yeah.
Karen Wellington here. Two things. One, they're sort of related, I suppose, but thank you for your talk. I also appreciated you defining the consent agenda, because it sounds silly, but I always kind of wondered, and I sort of assumed based on the word consent and agenda that it meant you were defining a broad section. But anyway, so I appreciate that, because that was always actually a question I had in the back of my mind. And I don't remember what you said exactly at the beginning about the team, or maybe it's not related. I had another comment to make, and of course now I've forgotten what it was. But I appreciated what you said, and I would like to learn more about the Robert's Rules of Order and how you figure that out, because it seems so confusing to me sometimes. And I went to one of the Presbytery things that they had, and that lady was really good, but it was also just a lot of information to take in, try to understand how to run a meeting following those rules, because I think they're interesting and I like the process of it. But anyway, that's my comments. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Karen. I think that there are some helpful kind of condensations of Robert's rules, a few pages that you could look at for the most important motions and actions, and there's some commentaries as well.
I think it's really easy to do a simple Google search about a summary of Robert's Rules summary. There are lots of 1 and 2 page checklists, synthesis of Robert's that are available.
One of the things that I find helpful, especially in a congregational meeting, for instance, that I've been asked to moderate from the session or from the presbytery, is to try to anticipate ahead what what might happen. And the fact that there might be people who want to amend a motion or take some unexpected action. If you can try to anticipate that and then do a little research. That came up recently in a situation where somebody wanted to amend a motion, and they said we had to act on the main motion before we could amend it, and that's not what Robert's Rules of Order says. So it's just try to anticipate that, so you have maybe a cheat sheet on the podium with you, so you can refer to it. But if you've got somebody like Marjorie who is a highly skilled stated clerk to help you with that, that's really, really important. Other questions or comments in general? Okay, Madam Presbytery Leader, that concludes my report.
Oh my goodness. Moderator of Coordinating Council and so many other things. Thank you for this. This is so helpful. And my hope was that today would be an opportunity for people who are just getting their feet wet in moderating or looking at that potentially down the road to get a glimpse from someone who understands both the science and the art of moderating, because it's really both, and you've handled that well. It strikes me in listening to this as a person with an enormous amount of gray hair, that this is a really good, it's a refresher for those of us who've been around the block. It's also an opportunity for us to get a glimpse at how you approach things, how another moderator approaches things, because there is context to consider, as Kevin so rightly said, and there's also the personality and the comfort and the priorities of the moderator that come to the mix as well. And so it's a treat. I hope I'm going to take this risk. I hope I speak for all of us in thanking you for your time. I hit send too soon in the chat, but one of the things that I wanted to say was that in my experience, oftentimes meetings in church contexts are an opportunity to do business and to do something else. And I think a priority in or out of a pandemic is the opportunity to nurture community. Because I think it goes right back to your first point, that we build a stronger team when we know and understand each other, that we get a sense of each other's gifts, that we know what the weather report is like for each person and what they're bringing to the table that day or evening. And sometimes we get really busy and really tired, and sometimes the community building piece of that takes a back seat. And I have found a resource over the last few years. It's kind of dusty. I looked at the publication date and it's 1998. So that's like older than some of your children. In any case, I have found it to be a nice resource for framing conversation that includes both business and community, and signals the type of meeting that you're involved in. So I'm going to hit enter now, and it's in the chat. It's a book called Growing Together by Roxanne Melander and Harold Epley. And it's a slim volume. I believe it's still in print. And it's a good resource in case you're looking for prayers, a little Bible study, particularly around themes for meetings. So that's my contribution. It's 12:59. We're going to do a quick blessing and send you on your way if you want to be let loose from this space. At this point, we're going to turn the recording off, and we're going to linger in the narthex with Steve for a few minutes to chat about whatever's on your mind. I really do hope that this has raised questions for you, and that once again, you know that you're not ever alone in these things, that the promises we make to one another in ordination are to be friends to our colleagues in ministry, and that's all of you. So thanks for being with us today. Thank you, Steve, so much. Vicki, thanks for being the PowerPoint queen that you are, and so many other things. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. May God bless you and keep you, and may God's face shine upon you and give you peace. Thanks so much.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, recording stops now. Let's see.